Daiho pressed his hands against the cold metal console as another explosion shook the communications tower. The screens flickered and sparked around him, but he kept working. His fingers moved fast across the controls even as dust fell from the ceiling above. Outside the tower windows, he could see the orange glow of fires burning across New Haven Colony. The Krelton ships hung in the sky like dark metal clouds, and their weapons kept firing down at his world. "This is New Haven Colony calling any ship in range." Daiho spoke into the transmitter for the 100th time that day. "We are under attack by Krelton forces. We need help. Please respond." The static answered him back the same way it had for 3 days now. Nobody was coming. Nobody cared about a small farming world filled with peaceful people who grew food instead of building weapons. Young Mi ran into the communications room with her green robes torn and dirt on her face. As head of the Agricultural Council, she had spent her whole life making things grow. Now she watched everything die. "Daiho, we have to evacuate the tower," she said, breathing hard. "The Kreltons landed troops near the South Farms. They are burning the grain fields and killing everyone they find." Daiho looked at his screen showing 17 different emergency channels. All quiet. All empty. The whole galaxy knew what was happening here, but nobody wanted to fight the Krelton Empire. They were too strong and too mean. Better to let one small world burn than risk their own ships and people. "The Galactic Council voted 3 hours ago," Young Mi said quietly. "Non-interference. They said getting involved would make things worse." She sat down hard in a chair and put her face in her hands. "Worse for who? How can it be worse for us?" Another explosion rocked the building and the lights went out for a few seconds. When they came back, Daiho saw something on his long-range scanner that made his heart sink even more. More Krelton ships were coming out of hyperspace. Big ones. The kind that could crack a planet open like an egg. "They are bringing in the heavy ships," he told Young Mi. "I think they want to make sure nobody survives to tell what happened here." He looked at the communication logs on his screen. 47 distress calls sent to the Altarian Republic. No response. 32 emergency signals to the Zephyrite Confederation. They sent back a message saying they were too far away to help, even though their fastest ships could be here in 2 days. The Crystalline Collective had not even answered once. Young Mi stood up and walked to the window. Below them, the colony was dying. Families ran through the streets carrying what they could while Krelton fighters shot at anything that moved. The medical centers were full of wounded people, and there was nowhere safe left to hide. "My daughter is in the shelter under the school," she said, without turning around. "She is only 8 years old. What do I tell her when the Kreltons find that shelter?" Daiho stared at his console. His people had never hurt anyone. They grew food that fed half the sector. They had shared their farming knowledge with dozens of species. They had never built a single warship or trained a single soldier. They believed that peace was better than war, and love was stronger than hate. Now they were learning that sometimes peaceful people die while others watch and do nothing. In orbit above them, Fleet Commander Taemin stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked down at the green world below. His scales were bright red with satisfaction. Another easy conquest for the Empire. The Valorans had not even tried to fight back. They just sent out distress calls that nobody answered and ran around like scared animals. "Begin the final bombardment," he told his weapons officer. "I want this world empty in 6 hours." "Commander, should we not take prisoners?" asked his second-in-command. "The Valorans know many things about growing food. The Empire could use that knowledge." Taemin showed, his sharp teeth in what humans would call a smile. "Dead people cannot rebel. Empty worlds cannot fight back. We take the knowledge from their computers and databases. We do not need living Valorans." He touched a control and red targeting markers appeared over every major settlement on the planet's surface. "Fire when ready." Back in the communications, Tower Daiho watched the Krelton ships move into bombardment position. He knew what that meant. He had maybe an hour before they started the killing shots, the ones that would turn cities into glass and people into ash. His hands moved across his controls one more time, but now he was not using the regular emergency channels. He was going deeper into the old networks. the restricted frequencies that most people stayed away from because they led to dangerous places. "Young Mai," he said quietly, "I am going to try something. There is one place I have not sent our call for help." She turned from the window. "Where? Who is left that might come?" Daeho looked at his screen where a new channel was opening. A channel that led toward the inner galaxy where the yellow sun burned, where the third planet held the people that made the whole galaxy whisper in fear. "The humans," he said. Young Mi went very still. Every child in the galaxy knew the stories about humans, how they had fought a war against the hegemony and won by doing things no civilized species would do, how they never took prisoners and never showed mercy, how their ships were black as space and silent as death, how they had weapons that could kill whole worlds and the will to use them. Most species had signed treaties promising never to bother the humans as long as the humans stayed in their part of space. "Daeho, they are monsters," Young Mi said. "The stories say they eat their enemies and drink blood and laugh while worlds burn. The stories also say they have never lost a war," Daeho replied. His fingers hovered over the transmit button, "and that they have the strongest fleet in the galaxy. Maybe monsters are what we need right now." Another explosion shook the tower and cracks appeared in the windows. Daeho could hear Krelton ground troops getting closer. Their energy weapons made a sound like screaming metal. In a few minutes they would be here, and then there would be no more transmissions from New Haven Colony. Daeho pressed the button and began to speak into the restricted channel. His words traveled across space toward the yellow sun and the forbidden worlds around it. "This is New Haven Colony to anyone listening in the Terran exclusion zone. The Krelthans are burning our world. Our children are dying. We know humans are out there somewhere. We have heard all the stories about what you can do. If any of this is true, and if there is any mercy left in you, please help us. We are not warriors. We are just farmers and teachers and doctors who never hurt anyone. But we are going to die unless someone comes to save us." He released the button and static filled the channel. Young Mi came over and stood beside him. Together they listened to the empty sound while explosions grew closer and the Krelton ships prepared to end their world. Daeho had sent his message into the dark toward the most feared people in the galaxy. Now all they could do was wait and see if monsters had hearts. Admiral Hyunwoo stood in the command center of the TNS Retribution deep in the Sol system when the message came through. The ship was one of 200 vessels that made up Earth's Ghost Fleet, and it had been his home for 15 years. The black hull bore scars from the human hegemony war that had ended 50 years ago, but the weapons were new and the crew was ready for anything. They had to be ready because the galaxy feared them more than any plague or natural disaster. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission on Restricted Channel 7, reported Communications Officer Park. "It is coming from the Valoran system near the Outer Rim." Hyunwoo knew about Valorans. They were peaceful plant lovers who had never bothered anyone. They grew food that fed dozens of worlds and shared their knowledge freely with anyone who asked. He also knew they had no military and no weapons worth mentioning. "Put it through," he said. The voice that came through the speakers was desperate and afraid. It spoke of burning worlds and dying children and enemies who showed no mercy. It asked for help from people who were known across the galaxy as monsters and killers. When the message ended, the command center was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. "Sir," said Intelligence Officer Hee-Jin as she pulled up data on her screen. "The Krelthan Empire has been expanding into that sector for months. They have taken 12 systems so far, and they do not leave survivors behind." Hyunwoo looked at the tactical display showing the Valoran system. It was far from Earth and had nothing humans needed. Getting involved would mean fighting the Krelthan Empire, which was one of the larger military powers in the galaxy. It would also mean revealing the location of Ghost Fleet assets that were supposed to stay hidden. "Send the message to Fleet Admiral So Young," he ordered. "This needs to go to the top." 3 hours later, Hyunwoo stood in the secure conference room aboard the command station hidden in the asteroid belt. Fleet Admiral So Young sat at the head of the table, while 20 other senior officers filled the chairs around it. The message from New Haven Colony played again, and when it finished, nobody spoke for a long time. "The Valorans have never been our allies," said Captain Jinho of the TNS Vengeance. "Most aliens think we are demons who should be locked away in our own system. Why should we risk our people for them?" Intelligence Officer Hijin activated her display showing the Valoran home system. "The Valorans are completely pacifist, sir. They do not even have police forces on their worlds. Everything is handled through councils and discussion groups. They have literally never hurt anyone in their entire recorded history." "That makes them weak," said another officer. "The galaxy runs on strength and they chose to be harmless. Now they pay the price." Fleet Admiral So Young had been quiet during the discussion, but now she stood up. She was a small woman with gray hair and scars on her hands from her days as a ship engineer. But when she spoke, everyone listened. "The galaxy thinks we are monsters," she said, looking around the table. "They tell stories about how we fight wars and make other species wet themselves with fear. They sign treaties promising to leave us alone because they are terrified of what we might do if we get angry." She touched a control, and the display changed to show intelligence reports from across the galaxy. "But look at what they do when they think we are not watching. The Kreltons burn worlds for fun. The hegemony keeps billions of slaves. The Altarians let their client species starve while they feast. The Zephyrite sell weapons to anyone with money, even if those weapons will be used on children." The room was still quiet as So Young continued. "We fought one war 50 years ago, against an empire that attacked us first. We won that war by doing whatever it took to protect our people. Now the whole galaxy thinks we are the evil ones while they watch peaceful farmers get murdered and do nothing." Captain Jinho leaned forward. "So what do you suggest, Admiral? That we become the galaxy's police force?" "I suggest we show them what real monsters do when innocents are threatened," So Young replied. "The Krelthans think they can kill anyone they want because nobody will stop them. Let us prove them wrong." Admiral Hyunwoo studied the tactical data. "It would take the entire Ghost Fleet to guarantee success. The Krelthans have over 300 ships in that sector and they know how to fight." "Then we send the entire Ghost Fleet," So Young said simply. "We have been hiding in our system for 50 years while the galaxy calls us names behind our backs. Maybe it is time we reminded everyone why they are afraid of us." The vote was not even close. 21 officers voted to deploy the Ghost Fleet to the Valoran system. 0 voted against. Within 6 hours, the largest human battle force since the Hegemony War began moving toward the hyperspace jump points, 200 ships carrying weapons and technology that no other species fully understood. Ships crewed by humans who had grown up hearing stories about what their parents and grandparents had done during the war. As the fleet prepared to leave, Sol System, the intelligence networks across the galaxy began lighting up with warnings and alerts. The Crystalline Collective detected massive energy signatures moving out of human space. Altarian spy stations recorded hyperspace distortions that could only come from large numbers of warships. The Zephyrite Confederation scrambled their fastest scouts to try to track the human fleet movements. Within 12 hours, every major government in the galaxy knew that Earth's Ghost Fleet was on the move. Emergency sessions were called. Military commanders were awakened from sleep. Trade routes were quietly rerouted away from anywhere the humans might be going. Nobody knew exactly what the humans were planning, but everyone remembered what had happened to the last people who made them angry. On the bridge of the TNS Retribution, Admiral Hyunwoo watched his navigation officer plot the course to the Valoran system. It would take them 4 days to get there using the standard hyperspace routes. 4 days while peaceful people died and their children hid in shelters waiting for the end. "Sir," said his tactical officer, "intelligence reports that Krelthan reinforcements are also moving toward the Valoran system. They want to finish this quickly, before anyone can interfere." Hyunwoo nodded. The Krelthans were not stupid. They knew that letting word spread about their latest conquest might eventually cause problems. Better to kill everyone fast and move on to the next target. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We are going to use the deep routes." The deep routes were hyperspace paths that most species considered too dangerous to travel. The gravity stresses were higher, and the navigation was much more difficult. Only human ships with their advanced computers and heavily reinforced hulls could use them safely. They would cut the travel time to 2 days, but they would also announce to anyone watching that the humans were in a very big hurry to get somewhere. As the Ghost Fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the galaxy held its breath. The last time human. Warships had moved in such numbers, whole star systems had been turned to radioactive dust. Governments that had ignored the Valoran distress calls began quietly reviewing their military readiness. Defense contractors saw their stock prices jump as everyone remembered that there were worse things in the universe than the Krelthan Empire. In the Valoran system, Deho sat in his damaged communications tower and watched the long-range sensors. He had picked up some strange readings near the edge of the system, but he was not sure what they meant. The Krelthan ships were still preparing for their final bombardment, and rescue shuttles were still evacuating civilians to the underground shelters. Nobody had answered his desperate message to the humans, and he was beginning to think that even monsters had limits on how much they cared about strangers. But deep in hyperspace, the Ghost Fleet raced through dimensions that normal matter could not survive. Admiral Hyunwoo stood on his bridge and counted the hours until they would arrive at New Haven Colony. Behind him, 200 ships full of humans who had spent their whole lives being called monsters, prepared to show the galaxy what monsters really did when someone hurt the innocent. The Ghost Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valoran system, like shadows coming alive. 200 black ships appeared where empty space had been just seconds before, and immediately went silent. No communications, no identification, signals. No demands for surrender or warnings to withdraw. They simply materialized and began to move toward the inner system, where the Krelthan Empire was finishing its conquest of New Haven Colony. On the bridge of his command ship Fleet Commander, Taman was reviewing the bombardment schedule when his sensor officer made a sound like a frightened animal. "Commander, we have multiple contacts entering the system, large vessels. They are not responding to our signals." Taemin walked over to look at the tactical display. What he saw there made his scales go pale, and his hearts begin beating faster. The computer was having trouble counting all the ships, but the number kept growing. 100, 150, 200. All of them moving in perfect formation like they had practiced this approach 1,000 times before. "What species builds ships that large?" asked his weapons officer. "Those signatures are enormous." The intelligence computer finished its analysis and displayed the results on the main screen. Taemin stared at the words and felt his blood turn cold. Human vessels. Terran design signatures. Earth military configuration. The monsters from the inner galaxy had come to his system, and he suddenly understood that his easy conquest was about to become something very different. "Signal the fleet," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Combat formation, prepare for engagement." But even as he gave the orders, he was remembering the stories every military officer in the galaxy knew about human warfare, how they had beaten the hegemony by refusing to follow any of the normal rules, how they targeted civilian infrastructure and military bases equally, how they never took prisoners and never accepted surrender once they decided you were their enemy. Captain Wu Jin of the stealth frigate TNS Nightmare was already deep in the system before the main fleet even arrived. His ship was designed to be invisible to enemy sensors, and he had spent 2 days studying Krelthan patrol patterns and fleet positions. Now he watched through his periscope as Krelthan ships scrambled to form defensive lines while having no idea where the human attack would come from. "Target lock on the supply depot at grid 77, reported his weapons officer. "The Krelthans have been using it to refuel their fighters." "Fire," said Wu Jin quietly. The Nightmare launched a spread of quantum torpedoes that crossed the Mi distance to the depot in seconds. The explosions lit up the darkness of space and took out 3 Krelthan fuel ships along with the depot itself. Before the enemy could even figure out where the attack had come from, the Nightmare was already moving to its next target. On the surface of New Haven Colony, Mi Young huddled in an underground cavern with 40 other survivors. She was a botanist who had spent her life studying how plants grew in different soils. Now she pressed her face against a crack in the rock ceiling and watched lights moving across the sky. For 2 days, those lights had been Krelthan ships preparing to kill everyone on her world. But now there were other lights. Stranger lights that moved differently and seemed to appear and disappear without warning. Are those more Krelthan ships? whispered the person beside her. Mi-young had studied astronomy before she became a botanist, and she knew how different species built their vessels. No, she said quietly. Those ships move like predators, like hunters. I think someone came to help us. Above them in orbit, the Ghost Fleet began to implement Protocol Nightmare. This was a battle doctrine that had been developed during the HFY Human Hegemony War, and it was designed to destroy enemy morale before destroying their ships. Instead of charging straight at the Krelton fleet, the human ships spread out across the system and began hunting in small groups. Admiral Hyun-woo watched, his tactical display as his captains reported successful strikes. The supply convoy at Grid 12 is gone, reported Captain Jinho. No survivors, no escape pods. Krelton Patrol Squadron eliminated at Grid 15, came another report. They never saw us coming. This was how humans fought wars. They did. Not line up their ships and trade shots with the enemy until someone surrendered. They stalked their prey like wolves hunting deer. They struck from the shadows and left nothing but wreckage behind. Most importantly, they made sure that some enemies survived each attack, so those survivors could spread fear to the rest of their fleet. Fleet Commander Tai-min listened to the reports coming in from his scattered forces and felt his command falling apart around him. In 2 hours, he had lost 30 ships, and he still did not know where most of the human vessels were located. His long-range sensors kept detecting movement, but when his ships went to investigate, they found nothing except the wreckage of their own patrol craft. Commander, we are receiving a transmission from Patrol Group 5, reported his communications. Officer. Put it through, said Tae-min. The voice that came through the speakers was shaking with terror. This is Captain Vekmore of the escort cruiser Bloodfang. We are under attack by unknown vessels. They came out of nowhere. They are not following normal combat protocols. They are hunting us like animals. Request immediate assistance. The transmission cut off in a burst of static and explosions. Tae-min stared at his tactical display where Patrol Group 5 had been marked with red X symbols meaning destroyed. 6 ships gone in less than 10 minutes. The humans were not just winning this battle. They were demonstrating why the galaxy feared them more than any natural disaster. Colonel Chang Ho stood in the deployment bay of the assault transport TNS Thunder and watched his Marines check their equipment. They were preparing for a combat drop onto the surface of New Haven Colony, where Krelton ground forces were still hunting Valoran civilians. Chang Ho had fought in border conflicts for 20 years, but this was his first chance to show alien enemies what human soldiers could do in close combat. Remember the mission, he told his troops. The Valorans are civilians, non-combatants. They have never hurt anyone, and they do not deserve what is happening to them. The Krelthans are military targets who have chosen to make war on peaceful people. Show them the difference. The assault pods launched from the Thunder and screamed down through the atmosphere of New Haven Colony. Krelthan anti-aircraft weapons tried to target them, but the pods used stealth technology and chaff dispensers to avoid most of the incoming fire. Chang Ho felt the impact as his pod hit the ground near a burning Valoran settlement where Krelthan soldiers were searching buildings for survivors to kill. The humans came out of their pods ready to fight, and the Krelthan ground forces learned why most species preferred to avoid close combat with Earth soldiers. Human Marines wore powered armor that made them faster and stronger than most aliens. They used weapons that could punch through vehicle armor, and they fought with a coordination that came from years of training together. But more than their equipment or their training, it was their attitude that made human soldiers so dangerous. They did not fight to gain territory or capture resources. They fought to protect people who could not protect themselves, and they took that mission personally. When a Krelthan squad tried to surrender after killing Valoran children, Chang Ho looked at their raised hands and gave an order that would be repeated across the galaxy. No prisoners. The battle for New Haven Colony continued through the night, as human forces systematically eliminated every Krelthan presence on the surface, while their fleet hunted enemy ships in orbit. But this was not a normal military engagement. This was a demonstration. A message being sent to every species in the galaxy about what happened when peaceful people asked the monsters for help, and the monsters decided to answer. In his command, Center Admiral Hyun-woo received reports from his ship captains and smiled grimly. The Krelthans still outnumbered his fleet 2-1. But numbers did not matter when your enemy was too frightened to fight effectively. Half the Krelton vessels were trying to retreat to safe distance, while the other half were scattered across the system looking for threats they could not find. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, "we are detecting hyperspace communications from the Krelton command ship. They are calling for reinforcements." Hyunwoo nodded. He had expected this. The Kreltons would not give up their conquest easily, and they had more ships they could bring to this system. But reinforcements would take time to arrive, and time was something the humans could use to their advantage. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Begin Phase 2 of Protocol Nightmare. I want every Krelton ship in this system to understand that they made a terrible mistake when they decided to hurt innocent people." Fleet Commander Taemin stood in his command center and stared at the tactical display showing his fleet falling apart. In 6 hours, he had lost over 60 ships to an enemy he could barely detect. The humans struck from the shadows like ghosts and left nothing but wreckage behind. His captains were reporting constant attacks, but when reinforcements arrived, they found only debris and the occasional escape pod carrying survivors who babbled about invisible death ships. The hyperspace communicator crackled to life with a transmission from Krelton High Command. "Commander Taemin, you will implement final protocol immediately. The Empire cannot allow this defeat to spread panic among our other conquests." Taemin felt his stomach drop. Final protocol meant the complete sterilization of New Haven Colony. Every living thing on the planet would be killed and the surface would be burned clean. It also meant executing all prisoners and witnesses. The Empire was willing to commit genocide rather than admit they had been beaten by humans. "High Command, the humans have not demanded our surrender," Taemin replied. "Perhaps we can negotiate a withdrawal." "Negative. The Empire does not negotiate with monsters. You will kill every Velaran on that planet and then retreat to the border worlds. The humans can have a dead rock if they want it so badly." The transmission ended and Taemin stared at his orders. He had conquered dozens of worlds for the Empire, but he had never been asked to murder an entire species before. The Valorans were not even fighting back. They were hiding in shelters and caves waiting for someone to save them. But High Command had spoken, and disobeying orders meant execution for him and his entire crew. "Signal all ground forces," he ordered quietly. "Begin final protocol. Kill all prisoners and prepare for planetary bombardment." On the surface of New Haven, Colony Strike Team leader Sun Ho crouched behind a pile of rubble and listened to the Krelton communications he was intercepting. His team had been hunting enemy soldiers for 3 hours, and they had eliminated 2 full squads without taking a single casualty. But now he was hearing something that made his blood run cold. "All teams, this is Sun Ho," he whispered into his radio. "The Kreltons just received orders to execute all prisoners and begin planetary sterilization. We have maybe 1 hour before they start killing civilians wholesale." Communications specialist Nae Young was monitoring enemy transmissions from her position near the main Krelton base when she picked up the execution orders. She immediately relayed them to Admiral Hyunwoo aboard the Retribution. "Sir, the Kreltons are about to implement what they call final protocol. It sounds like they plan to kill every living thing on this planet." Admiral Hyunwoo stood perfectly still for a long moment as he processed this information. Then he walked to his communications station and opened a channel that would broadcast on all frequencies across the Valoran system. Every ship and every ground force would hear what he was about to say. "This is Admiral Hyunwoo of the Terran Ghost Fleet speaking to all Krelton forces in this system. You have just ordered the execution of innocent civilians and the genocide of a peaceful species. You want to see monsters. You want to understand why the galaxy fears us. Watch carefully." He closed the channel and turned to his tactical officer. "Signal all ships. Implement total retaliation protocol. No prisoners, no mercy, no survivors." Total retaliation protocol was a doctrine that had been used only once before during the darkest days of the human hegemony war. It meant that the humans would abandon all rules of civilized warfare and fight like the monsters the galaxy believed them to be. Ships that had been hiding in the shadows suddenly revealed themselves. Weapons that had been kept powered down came online. The Ghost Fleet transformed from a collection of invisible hunters into an unstoppable force of destruction. Captain Jinho of the TNS Vengeance received his orders and smiled grimly. His ship was designed for siege warfare, and he had been waiting for a chance to show what human engineering could accomplish. "Target the Krelthan command ship," he ordered his weapons officer. "Full spread. I want that vessel disabled but not destroyed. We need their commander alive." The Vengeance fired a barrage of ion cannons that overloaded the command ship's shields and knocked out its main engines. Krelthan damage control teams scrambled to restore power, but before they could get their weapons back online, human boarding pods were already attaching to their hull. Elite Marines in powered armor cut through the ship's armor like it was paper and began fighting their way toward the bridge. Fleet Commander Taemin watched his bridge fill with smoke as explosions rocked his ship. His security forces were reporting human boarders on multiple decks and his engines were completely dead. Through his viewports, he could see other Krelthan vessels being systematically destroyed by ships that seemed to appear from nowhere just long enough to fire their weapons. The bridge doors exploded inward and human soldiers in black armor poured through the gap. Their weapons were aimed at every Krelthan on the bridge, but they did not fire immediately. The lead soldier removed his helmet, and Taemin saw a human face for the first time. It looked remarkably ordinary except for the cold eyes that seemed to see right through him. "I am Colonel Chang Ho of the Terran Marines," the human said in perfect Krelthan. "You are Fleet Commander Taemin, and you just ordered the genocide of the Valoran species. That was a mistake." On the surface of New Haven Colony, human strike teams were racing to reach Valoran shelter sites before Krelthan execution squads could carry out their orders. Sun Ho's team arrived at Elementary School 7 just as Krelthan soldiers were setting up their weapons outside the underground shelter, where 200 Valoran children were hiding with their teachers. "Weapons free," Sun Ho ordered his Marines. "Priority targets are any Kreltans threatening civilians." The firefight was brief and one-sided. Human soldiers in powered armor with advanced weapons against Krelthan infantry with standard military equipment. But what made the difference was not the technology, but the motivation. The humans were fighting to protect children, and they brought an intensity to the battle that terrified their enemies. In the shelter beneath the school, 8-year-old Dong Min huddled against his teacher Young-soo and listened to the sounds of fighting above them. The explosions were getting louder and closer, and he was very afraid. Then the shelter door opened and a figure in black armor looked down at them. "Are you hurt?" the figure asked in careful Valoran. When the helmet came off, Dongmin saw it was a human woman with kind eyes. "My name is Captain Lee and I am here to help you. The bad people cannot hurt you anymore." Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out as human forces reached shelter after shelter, just ahead of Krelthan execution squads. The Marines who had grown up hearing stories about their grandparents fighting the hegemony now had their own war to fight. A war to protect innocent people from an empire that thought genocide was an acceptable military tactic. In orbit, the Ghost Fleet had abandoned all pretense of stealth warfare. Human ships appeared throughout the system like avenging angels and began the systematic destruction of every Krelthan vessel they could find. But they were not simply trying to win a battle anymore. They were sending a message to the galaxy about what happened when someone crossed certain lines. Admiral Hyunwoo watched his tactical display as Krelthan ships tried desperately to escape the system. Some of them made it to hyperspace jump points, but most were caught by human interceptors and destroyed before they could flee. The few escape pods that managed to launch were ignored. He wanted some survivors to carry word of what had happened here back to the Krelthan Empire. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we are receiving surrender offers from multiple Krelthan vessels." Hyunwoo thought about the Valoran children hiding in shelters, while Krelthan soldiers prepared to murder them. He thought about the farms burning and the hospitals destroyed, and the peaceful people who had never hurt anyone being hunted like animals. "No surrender," he said quietly. "They made their choice when they decided innocent lives were acceptable casualties." The battle for New Haven Colony ended 12 hours after the Ghost Fleet had revealed itself. Not a single Krelthan ship remained operational in the system, and only a handful of enemy soldiers were still alive on the planet's surface. Those few survivors would carry word back to their empire about what they had witnessed. But the real message was not meant for the Krelthans. It was meant for every species in the galaxy that had received distress calls from New Haven Colony and chosen to do nothing. They had all heard the stories about human monsters who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Now they knew. Those stories were true, and they understood something else as well. Sometimes monsters were exactly what the situation required. 3 days after the Ghost Fleet arrived at New Haven Colony, the last Krelton resistance ended with a whimper rather than a battle cry. Fleet Commander Taemin sat in a human detention cell aboard the TNS Retribution and stared at the walls. He was the only senior Krelton officer to survive the engagement, and he knew his captors were keeping him alive for a reason. Humans did not take prisoners during combat, but they sometimes kept witnesses afterward. Admiral Hyunwoo entered the cell and sat down across from the defeated commander. "Your empire sent reinforcements," he said without introduction. 3 battle groups. Nearly 400 ships. They arrived 6 hours ago at the edge of the system. Taemin looked up with hope in his eyes. The empire had not abandoned him after all. With 400 fresh ships, they could still turn this disaster into victory. "Then you will surrender your fleet and withdraw to your territory," he said, trying to sound confident. "No," Hyunwoo replied calmly. "We sent them a message. A recording of what happened here. The execution orders you received from High Command. The systematic murder of civilians. The attempted genocide of an entire species." He paused and studied the Krelton's face. "Your reinforcements jumped back to hyperspace without firing a shot. It seems even the mighty Krelton Empire knows better than to fight monsters when those monsters are protecting innocents." On the surface of New Haven Colony, medical ships from the Ghost Fleet worked alongside Valoran doctors to treat the wounded and help rebuild damaged settlements. Human engineers used their advanced technology to repair power grids and communication networks, while Marine units continued searching for survivors in remote areas. Young Mi stood in what had been the Agricultural Council building and watched human soldiers carefully moving equipment to restore the hydroponic farms that fed half the colony. These were the same people the galaxy called monsters and demons, the same species that parents used to frighten misbehaving children with stories about humans who ate their enemies and drank blood. "They are not what I expected," said Council Member Byung-ho as he joined her at the window. Young Mi nodded. "The human who saved my daughter from the shelter was so gentle with her. She learned Dongmin's name and promised to help find his parents. When she found out his father was dead, she sat with him while he cried." Medical Officer Seon-woo worked in the emergency treatment center that had been set up in the colony's main square. For 18 hours straight, he had treated Valoran civilians who had been wounded in the fighting or traumatized by their ordeal. Most of them were terrified when they first saw his human face, but his gentle manner and obvious skill gradually won their trust. "Doctor," called his assistant, "we have another patient coming in. Valoran child with severe burns from a Krelthan energy weapon." Seon-woo nodded and prepared his equipment. This was the 47th civilian he had treated. Since arriving at New Haven, and every single one had been hurt by Krelthan forces while trying to hide or flee. Not one had been injured while fighting because Valoran simply did not fight. They were as purely peaceful as any species the galaxy had ever produced. Diplomatic Officer Kyung-mi sat across from Valoran Council Leader Jae-young in a temporary meeting room and tried to explain why Earth had responded to their distress call. "We heard your message asking for help," she said simply. "So we came." "But we are strangers to you," Jae-young replied. "Our species have had no contact before this. We have nothing you need and nothing we can offer in trade. Why would you risk your ships and people for us?" Kyung-mi was quiet for a moment as she considered how to answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," she finally said. "Because someone had to answer when you called for help. Because peaceful people should not have to die alone while the galaxy watches and does nothing. The stories about humans say you are monsters who care nothing for other species. The stories are not wrong," Kyung-mi admitted. "We can be monsters when we need to be, but we choose very carefully when to be monsters and when to be something else." Across the galaxy, news of what had happened at New Haven Colony spread through every communication network and intelligence service. The human Ghost Fleet had not only defeated a superior Krelthan force, but had done it while protecting civilians and rebuilding infrastructure. Military analysts tried to understand how 200 human ships had eliminated over 300 enemy vessels without losing a single ship of their own. The answer was not just superior technology or better training, though humans had both of those things. The difference was in how humans approached warfare itself. Other species fought to gain territory or resources or to prove their strength. Humans fought to protect people who could not protect themselves, and that gave them a focus and determination that their enemies could not match. In the Krelthan capital city, emergency meetings were held as reports came in from the survivors of New Haven Colony. The few escape pods that had made it back to Empire space carried stories that no military commander wanted to hear. Stories about human ships that appeared from nowhere and struck without warning. About boarding actions where human soldiers in powered armor carved through ship defenses like they were made of paper. About an enemy that showed no mercy to those who threatened innocents but treated prisoners with unexpected kindness once the fighting was over. The humans could have destroyed our reinforcement fleet, reported Intelligence Director Vex Cole to the High Command. 400 of our best ships, and they chose to let them withdraw. They sent a message instead, a recording of the massacre orders we gave, and footage of our forces preparing to execute civilian prisoners. High Commander Zektul studied the tactical reports and felt something he had not experienced in 20 years of conquest. Fear. What do the humans want? He asked. Nothing, Vex Cole replied. They made no demands. They issued no ultimatums. They simply told our forces to leave Velaran space and never return. That cannot be all they want. According to our psychological profiles of human behavior, it probably is all they want. They responded to a distress call from a peaceful species under attack. They eliminated the threat. Now they are helping with reconstruction efforts and will likely withdraw once the Valorans are safe. High Commander Zektul stared at the tactical display showing the location of the Valoran system. You are telling me that the most feared military force in the galaxy mobilized their entire battle fleet just to help strangers who had nothing to offer in return? That appears to be exactly what happened, sir. Fleet Admiral So Young stood on the observation deck of her command station and watched the hyperspace communication reports flowing in from across human space. Every major government in the galaxy was suddenly very interested in establishing diplomatic relations with Earth. Species that had ignored human contact requests for decades were now sending urgent messages asking for trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The Altarian Republic wants to discuss technology sharing, reported her aide. The Zephyrite Confederation is offering to open their trade routes to human merchants. Even the Crystalline Collective has sent a formal apology for their previous isolationist policies. So Young was not surprised. Fear was a powerful motivator, but it was also temporary. What lasted longer was respect and the knowledge that humans could be trusted to do what they promised. What about the peaceful species, she asked. 17 different governments have sent quiet inquiries about mutual protection agreements. They are afraid to ask openly, but they want to know if humans would respond to distress calls from their worlds as well. And what did you tell them? That humans have always responded when innocent people called for help. We just had not been asked very often before now. Back on New Haven Colony, Admiral Hyunwoo walked through the rebuilt town center with young Mio as his guide. The scars of the Krelthan attack were still visible, but the Velarans had begun the long process of healing their world. Children who had hidden in shelters during the bombardment now played in the streets while their parents worked to restore the farms and schools that made their civilization possible. Admiral, young Mi said as they paused beside a memorial being built for those who had died in the attack. I need to ask you something that has been troubling me since you arrived. Go ahead. Are you truly the monsters the galaxy believes you to be? Hyunwoo was quiet for a long time before answering. We are exactly what we need to be, he finally said. Monsters to those who threaten innocence, protectors to those who cannot protect themselves. The galaxy fears us because we refuse to let fear make us weak or cruel make us heartless. But you could have ignored our call for help. Nobody would have blamed you for staying in your own territory. Someone would have blamed us, Hyunwoo replied. We would have blamed ourselves, and that matters more than what the rest of the galaxy thinks. A week later, the Ghost Fleet prepared to leave New Haven Colony. The Valoran system had been declared the first official human-protected zone, and monitoring stations had been established to watch for future threats. As the black ships began their journey back to human space, they left behind a changed galaxy. The balance of power had shifted, not because humans had conquered territory or destroyed enemies, but because they had shown what monsters could accomplish when they chose to protect rather than prey upon.